upon us like dogs upon a hare. You held ruin over us, and again you offered me money, as much money as I wished, if only I would sell myself to you, and then you bided your time, leaving despair to do its work. I saw the toils closing around us. I knew that if I did not yield, my father would be driven from his home in his old age, and that the place he loved better than his life would pass to strangers, would pass to you. No, father, do not stop me. I will speak my mind. And at last I determined that, cost what it might, I would yield. Whether I could have carried out my determination, God only knows. I almost think that I should have killed myself upon my marriage day. I made up my mind. Not 5 minutes ago the very words were upon my lips that would have sealed my fate, when deliverance came. And now go. I have done with you. Your money shall be paid to you, capital and interest, down to the last farthing. I tender back my price, and knowing you for what you are, I despise you. That is all I have to say."
"Well, if that bean't a master one," ejaculated George aloud.
Ida, who had never looked more beautiful than she did in this moment of passion, turned to seat herself, but the tension of her feelings and the torrent of her wrath and eloquence had been too much for her, and she would have fallen had not Harold, who had been listening amazed to this overpowering outburst of nature, ran up and caught her in his arms. As for Edward Cossey, he had shrunk back involuntarily beneath the volume of her scorn, till he stood with his back against the panelled wall. His face was white as a sheet. Despair and fury shone in his large dark eyes. Never had he desired this woman more fiercely than he did now, in the moment when he knew that she had escaped him for ever. In a sense he was to be pitied, for passion tore his heart in twain. For a moment he stood thus, and then with a spring rather than a step he advanced across the room till he was face to face with Harold, who, with Ida half fainting, still in his arms, and her head upon his shoulder, was standing on the further side of the great open grate. "Blank you," he said, "I owe this to you, you half-pay adventurer," and he lifted his arm as though to strike him. "Come, none of that," said the Squire, speaking for the first time. "I will have no brawling here." "No," put in George, edging his long form between the two, "and begging your pardon, sir, don't you go a calling of better men than yourself adventurers. At any rate, if the Colonel is an adventurer, he has adventured to some purpose, as is easy to see," and he pointed to Ida lying in his arms. "Hold your tongue, sir," roared the Squire, as usual, relieving his feelings on his retainer. "You are always shoving your oar in where it isn't wanted." "All right, Squire, all right," said George the imperturbable. "Then his manners shouldn't be sich." "Do you mean to allow this?" said Cossey, turning fiercely to the old gentleman. "Do you mean to allow this man to marry your daughter for her money?" "Mr. Cossey," answered the Squire with his politest and most old-fashioned bow, "whatever sympathy I may have felt for you is being rapidly alienated by your manner. I told you that my daughter must speak for herself. She has spoken very clearly, and in short I have absolutely nothing to add to her words." "I tell you what it is," said Cossey, shaking with fury, "I have been tricked and fooled and played with, and so sure as there is a God above us, I will have my revenge on you all somehow. The money that this man says that he has found belongs to the Queen and not to you, and I will take care that the proper people are informed of it before you can make away with it. And when that is taken from you, if indeed the whole thing is not a trick, we will see what will happen to you. I will tell you that I will take this property, and I will pull this old place you are so fond of down stone by stone and throw it into the moat and send the plough over the site. I will sell the estate piecemeal and blot it out. I tell you I have been tricked. You encouraged the marriage yourself. You know you did, and you forbade that man the house." And he paused for a breath and to collect his words. Again the Squire bowed, and his bow was a study in itself. You do not see such bows nowadays. "1 minute, Mr. Cossey," he said very quietly, for it was one of his peculiarities to become abnormally quiet in circumstances of real emergency, "and then I think that we may close this painful interview. When first I knew you I did not like you.
Afterwards, through various circumstances, I modified my opinion and set my dislike down to prejudice. You are quite right in saying that I encouraged the idea of a marriage between you and my daughter, and also that I forbade the house to Colonel Quaritch. I did so because, to be honest, I saw no other way of avoiding the utter ruin of my family, but perhaps I was wrong in so doing. I hope that you may never be placed in a position which will force you to such a decision. Also, at the time, indeed never till this moment have I quite realised how the matter really stood. I did not understand how strongly my daughter was attached in another direction. Perhaps I was unwilling to understand it. Nor did I altogether understand the course of action by which, it seems, you obtained a promise of marriage from my daughter in the first instance. I was anxious for the marriage because I believed you to be a better man than you are, and because I thought that it would place my daughter and her descendants in a much improved position, and that she would in time become attached to you. I forbade Colonel Quaritch the house because I thought that an alliance with him would be most undesirable for everybody concerned. I find that in all this I was acting wrongly, and I frankly admit it. Perhaps as we grow old we grow worldly also, and you and your agents pressed me very hard, Mr. Cossey. Still, I have always told you that my daughter was a free agent and must decide for herself, and therefore I owe you no apology on that score. So much then for the question of your engagement to Miss de la Molle. It is done with. And now, as regards the threats you make, I shall try to meet them as occasion arises, and if I cannot do so, it will be my misfortune. But one thing they show me, though I am sorry to have to say it to any man in a house which I can still call my own, they show me that my first impressions of you were the correct ones. You are not a gentleman, Mr. Cossey, and I must beg to decline the honour of your further acquaintance." And with another bow he opened the vestibule door and stood holding the handle in his hand. Edward Cossey looked round with a stare of rage, and then muttering one most comprehensive curse, he stalked from the room, and in another minute was driving fast through the ancient gateway. Poor man, let us pity him, for he also certainly got his full due. George followed him to the outer door, and then he did a thing that nobody had seen him do before. He burst out into a loud laugh. "What are you making that noise about?" asked his master sternly. "This is no laughing matter." "Him," replied George, pointing to the retreating dog-cart. "He's a-going to pull down the castle and throw it into the moat and send the plough over it, is he? Him, that varmint! Why, them old towers will be a-standing there when his beggarly bones is dust, and when his name ain't no more a name, and there'll be one of the old blood sitting in them too. I know it, and I have always knowed it. Come, Squire, though you always do say how I is a fool, what did I tell you? I did tell you that Providence weren't a-going to let this place go to any lawyers or bankers or them sort. Why, of course I did, and now you see. Not but what is owing to the Colonel. He was the man that found it, but then God Almighty taught him how to do it. But he's a good un, he is, and a gentleman, not like him." And he once more pointed with unutterable scorn to the road down which Edward Cossey had vanished. "Now look here," said the Squire, "don't you stand talking here all day about things you don't understand. That's the way you waste time. You be off and look after this gold. It should not be left alone, you know. We will come down presently to Molehill, for I suppose that that's where it is. No, I can't stop to hear the story now, and besides I want Colonel Quaritch to tell it to me." "All right, Squire," said George, touching his red nightcap. "I'll be off." And he started. "George!" halloaed his master after him, but George did not stop. He had a trick of deafness when the Squire was calling, and he wanted to go somewhere else. "Confound you," roared the old gentleman, "why don't you stop when I call you?" This time George brought his long, lank frame to a standstill. "Beg pardon, Squire." "Beg pardon, yes, you're always begging pardon. Look here, you had better bring your wife and have dinner in the servants' hall to-day and drink a glass of port." "Thank you, Squire," said George, again touching his red nightcap. "And look here, George, give me your hand, man. Here's a Merry Christmas to you. We've gone through some queerish times about this place together, but now it almost looks as though we're going to end our days in peace and plenty